a cold October evening in 1987, the small town of Ashford, Washington hummed with the sound of a departing train. The Silver Canyon Express, a midnight service bound for Seattle, pulled into the station under dim platform lights. It was the kind of night that felt ordinary, too ordinary to be remembered, except for what came after. 4 teenage girls, Leah Monroe, Emily Brooks, Dana Price, and Hannah Voss, stepped onto the platform, laughing as they juggled duffel bags and paper cups of hot chocolate. They were best friends since middle school, inseparable, and this trip was supposed to be their small adventure before college applications and adult life pulled them apart. They were heading to Seattle for a weekend concert, something their parents reluctantly agreed to after weeks of pleading. A station attendant remembered them clearly. They looked like they'd been waiting for this night forever. The train was running late, 11:47 p.m., instead of 11:20. The air was thick with the metallic smell of rain, the sound of the engine echoing off the concrete walls. The girls boarded carriage 4. Passengers later recalled the energy, laughter, perfume, the flash of a camera. Leah had brought along a small tape recorder, narrating their trip like a mock travel show. That recording would become the last trace of their voices. The Silver Canyon Express left Ashford at exactly 11:52 p.m., headlights cutting through the mist, carriages swaying as they climbed toward the forested hills. Somewhere between mile marker 83 and 91, something went terribly wrong. At 2:10 a.m., the train arrived in Seattle as scheduled, but the 4 girls were not on board. Their tickets were scanned, their belongings missing, and their compartment empty. It was as if the night itself had erased them. By dawn, parents were calling every hospital, police station, and radio line. The Ashford Police Department dispatched search teams along the rail line. Helicopters scoured the dense forest, floodlights sweeping across tracks. No sign of derailment, no blood, no torn metal, just silence. The conductor insisted all passengers were accounted for. "We had no disturbance, no stops between Ashford and Renton," he told reporters. They must have disembarked early, but no one had seen them at any intermediate station. The first real clue came 3 days later, when a local hunter discovered a white canvas sneaker lodged in the mud near the Blackwood Embankment, 9 miles from the main track. It matched Leah's size and brand. There were drag marks in the soil, faint and broken by rain. Investigators believed the girls might have jumped or been forced off the moving train. But there were no signs of struggle on board, no witnesses to anything unusual. Within a week, the case had become a media storm. News vans lined the Ashford station, broadcasting nightly as families held vigils on the platform. Parents spoke directly to the camera, begging anyone who had seen the girls to come forward. Emily's mother whispered through tears, "If they're out there, please, just send them home." Detectives interviewed every crew member, reviewed passenger lists, checked nearby rest stops and motels. Nothing. Every lead dissolved into rumor. Some swore they saw the girls hitchhiking near the Old Mill Road. Others claimed they heard screams from the tunnel. Then came a disturbing tip. An anonymous caller told police to search beyond the tunnel. The number was traced to a payphone off Highway 9. When officers arrived, the booth was vandalized, the receiver swinging in the wind. In late November, investigators expanded their search radius. Cadaver dogs traced a scent near the tunnel's maintenance path, only for it to vanish after 40 yards. Rain had washed away most of the evidence. The FBI joined the case in December, treating it as a potential abduction. They built a profile. 4 young women, no history of running away, no criminal ties, no sign of depression. The working theory was abduction by someone on the train. But who? An early suspect, a maintenance worker with a record for trespassing, was detained and questioned. He claimed he had seen a locked compartment in carriage 4 that night, something that wasn't listed in train schematics. His statement was dismissed for lack of proof. The report was filed, redacted, and eventually forgotten. By year's end, winter closed in. Posters with the girls' faces fluttered against icy poles. Candlelight vigils turned into quiet memorials. The laughter that once echoed on that platform became an absence, one that haunted the town for decades. The Silver Canyon Express continued its route every night through the same valley, through the same tunnel where 4 friends vanished without a trace. Some say on still nights, you can hear faint laughter echoing from the tunnel walls. the last sound before the train disappears into darkness. And somewhere, buried beneath years of dust and silence, the truth waited to be found. The morning after the disappearance, Ashford woke to sirens and confusion. The Silver Canyon Express had arrived in Seattle without 4 of its passengers, and no one could explain how. For a town that measured life by routine, morning shifts, school bells, and Sunday markets, the mystery shattered a fragile sense of safety. Parents gathered at the small brick police station, clutching photographs and hope that felt thinner with every passing hour. The first official search began before sunrise. State troopers lined the rail between mile marker 83 and 91, combing through frost and ferns, looking for anything the night train might have left behind. The forest was thick with cedar and fog, its silence broken only by dogs barking in the distance. Every few minutes someone would call out, "Over here," only for it to be a false alarm, a jacket, a scrap of paper, a glint of metal. Reporters arrived before the second day ended, their satellite vans turning Ashford's quiet streets into a maze of cables and lights. News anchors spoke of the vanishing girls and the mystery train, turning tragedy into nightly spectacle. Yet beneath the noise, investigators were already running out of leads. Detective Marcus Keene, a young officer new to the department, led the ground team. He wrote in his notes that the terrain near Blackwood Tunnel felt wrong, too quiet, like something holding its breath. Keene's men found the white sneaker there, half buried in mud and pine needles. It was sent to the state lab, but the report came back inconclusive. There were no fingerprints, no trace of struggle, and no other personal belongings nearby. In the following days, teams searched the embankments, the drainage shafts, and the service roads used by railway workers. Helicopters traced thermal scans over the forest canopy. Nothing. The train's black box showed no sudden deceleration or anomaly. The driver's statement remained unchanged. It was a smooth ride. By the end of the first week, the case shifted from rescue to recovery. The FBI stepped in, citing the possibility of an interstate crime. Families resisted the word abduction. They still believed their daughters might be lost, hurt, somewhere waiting to be found. The investigation soon tangled in contradictions. One witness, a gas station clerk near Ravens Bend, claimed he saw 4 girls walking past midnight, laughing, carrying bags. But when shown photographs, he hesitated. Maybe 2 of them. Another tip suggested they'd boarded a truck heading east. A third caller insisted he saw lights flashing in the tunnel at 1 a.m. Each lead pulled the case in a new direction, then fell apart. Meanwhile, the townspeople began to whisper about the Blackwood Tunnel. For decades, locals avoided it. Built in 1912, it was said to echo even when trains weren't passing through. The maintenance logs for October 17th showed something odd. A note scribbled by an unknown engineer. Access door sealed. Keep personnel clear. The handwriting was never identified. Detective Keene requested to search the service shaft near the tunnel's northern exit. His request was denied, structurally unsafe, according to rail authorities. He returned anyway with 2 volunteers and found nothing but collapsed concrete and standing water. Still, his report ended with a single line. They didn't just vanish. They were taken. Public pressure mounted, then faded. By November, rain drowned most of the search zones. Media coverage moved on. Ashford returned to uneasy normalcy, its main street quieter, its station emptier. Posters of the girls peeled from the walls, their colors washed to gray. At Christmas, the families gathered together for the first time. They lit candles on the platform where their daughters were last seen. Ellen Parker placed 4 small gifts at the base of the bench: a silver charm bracelet, a folded letter, a dried rose, and an unopened concert ticket. She whispered that she'd keep the lights on until they find their way home. Investigators filed their final report that winter. No further evidence. Missing persons presumed deceased. Boxes of documents were sealed, tagged, and placed into storage at the county records office. The official story ended there, but Detective Keene never let it go. In his final field entry, written weeks after the case closed, he noted something the others had overlooked. Carriage 4 had been removed from rotation 2 days after the disappearance, allegedly for repairs. He underlined one sentence: "Find out who signed that order." No one ever did, and years later, when that same carriage reappeared in a forgotten rail yard, The case that died in a file cabinet would breathe again. By early 1990, the Ashford investigation had become a memory no one wanted to reopen. The case files, 14 boxes of reports, photographs, and transcribed interviews, sat on the lowest shelf of the county evidence room. Dust gathered faster than signatures. Detectives were reassigned, the FBI withdrew, and the families were left staring at silence that stretched across decades. Officially, the report read, "All leads exhausted. Case status, inactive." But in Ashford, no one called it closed. They called it unfinished. Detective Marcus Keene left the department 6 months later. Burnout, some said. Others believed he was pushed out after refusing to change the final summary in his report. He had written that internal inconsistencies suggested tampering, specifically the mysterious removal of Carriage 4 from the Silver Canyon Express's service schedule. His supervisor crossed out the sentence with thick red ink. When Keene appealed, the request disappeared in the paperwork. The families didn't know. They were told the investigation had been thorough. In the years that followed, time did what bureaucracy couldn't. It buried the case. The media moved on to newer tragedies. The public forgot the girls' names. But for people like Ellen Parker, forgetting was impossible. She kept her daughter's room untouched. Curtains drawn, the train ticket pinned above the bed like a relic. Every anniversary she called the police department asking if there were updates. Every year the answer was the same. No new evidence at this time. Ashford itself changed. The station that once carried the Silver Canyon Express fell into disrepair. The ticket booth closed, weeds pushing through the concrete. Trains still passed, but they never stopped anymore. Sometimes at night, locals swore they heard the faint sound of laughter carried by the wind. 4 voices, young and distant, echoing through the tunnel. In 1997, a new storage system forced the county to transfer unsolved cases to a federal archive. The Ashford file was boxed again, tagged Case 87414 Missing Persons Cold. It was supposed to go to the Central Evidence Warehouse in Portland. But the transfer logs showed something strange, a missing signature. The file had been logged out by an unknown employee and never properly checked in. For nearly 15 years, no one asked about it. Not the department, not the bureau, not the rail company that had quietly changed its name in the 1990s. Until one day, a storm knocked out power at the Ashford Municipal Office. When staff went to the basement to check the fuse box, they found several metal cabinets rusted shut from years of neglect. Inside one drawer, behind water-stained folders, was a file stamped with the faded words, Train 604 Restricted Access. It contained photocopies of the missing girl's ticket stubs, early autopsy requests that were never processed, and one envelope marked, "To be reviewed if recovered evidence surfaces." The seal was unbroken. The clerk who found it sent an internal memo to the State Records Division noting the oversight. 2 months later, a federal courier arrived quietly, signed for the file, and drove away. No one ever learned where it went. For the families, time simply became a cycle of waiting. Holidays passed with empty chairs. Graduations, weddings, grandchildren, all measured against the space those 4 girls once filled. Ellen Parker often said she could still hear the train whistle at night. "It's like it's calling them home," she told a local reporter in 2003. The interview never aired. The network dropped the story after being told records could not be verified. The world moved forward. But somewhere in a locked cabinet, beneath layers of dust and bureaucracy, the truth waited, sealed inside a box no one was meant to open. And then, 25 years after the Silver Canyon Express made its final journey through Blackwood Tunnel, a railway crew found something buried near Mile 88, a discovery that would drag the case back into daylight. By the fall of 2012, the disappearance of the 4 Ashford girls had become little more than a tragic legend, a story parents told to warn their children about strangers and trains that never stopped where they should. The old Blackwood rail line had long since been decommissioned, its tunnels sealed, its tracks rusting beneath moss and rain. Ashford Station was boarded up, the sign half fallen, its letters fading into memory. That October, a construction crew was sent to clear the area near Mile 88, where an old maintenance cabin was being demolished to make way for a new freight route. The crew chief, Victor Raines, noticed something strange buried beneath the collapsed floorboards. a rusted metal trunk, the kind used by railway engineers in the 1980s. It was heavy, padlocked, and covered in dirt so thick it looked like part of the earth itself. When rains pried it open, the smell of mildew and time spilled out. Inside were 4 objects wrapped in decayed cloth: a silver bracelet, a small diary, a faded Polaroid, and a cassette tape marked in blue ink. October 17th, train 604. He reported the find to local authorities. Within 24 hours, the FBI's Cold Case Unit 9 was notified. The name alone, Train 604, was enough to reopen one of the Bureau's most infamous unsolved disappearances. Special Agent Meredith Cole was assigned to lead the reinvestigation. She was known inside the Bureau for her relentless focus and a reputation for unearthing long-buried truths. Cole had been 10 years old when the girls vanished. She still remembered the news broadcasts, the flickering black and white photo of their smiling faces. Now she was holding the evidence that could finally tell the story adults once said had no ending. The trunk and its contents were transferred to the federal crime lab in Quantico. The bracelet was confirmed to belong to Emily Brooks, identified through engravings of her initials. The diary, water-damaged but partially legible, contained short entries mostly about school, music, and the upcoming Seattle trip. The final entry stopped mid-sentence. Train leaves at 11:20. Leah says we'll record the whole thing. But it was the cassette tape that stopped everyone cold. Forensic technicians restored the magnetic tape carefully, layer by layer. At first, it sounded like static, a hiss of white noise and engine hum. Then faint laughter. Then voices, young, excited, unafraid. "This is Leah reporting live from the most boring train in America," one girl said, followed by a chorus of giggles. Then came the metallic grind of wheels, a low thump, and a scream abruptly cut off by silence. Cole ordered the tape analyzed again. A voice expert confirmed there was a 5th sound buried beneath the distortion, deep, male, and close to the microphone. Just 2 words could be made out. Carriage 4. News of the discovery hit national headlines within days. Old photos resurfaced, interviews with aging investigators played on TV. Families who had stopped believing in closure were suddenly answering phone calls from federal agents again. Ellen Parker, now gray-haired and frail, watched the news from her living room and whispered, "They found them, didn't they?" Cole visited her 2 days later. She didn't promise closure, only truth. Ellen handed her a small box wrapped in tissue, the original train ticket from 1987, edges yellowed with age. "This belonged to my daughter," she said softly. "If you're going to find her, take this with you." The next morning, Cole stood at the entrance of Blackwood Tunnel, the same stretch of rail where the girls vanished. Fog crawled along the ground like smoke from a fire long extinguished. Somewhere beneath her feet, the earth hid a story that had been waiting 25 years to be told. And when the tape played again under forensic filters, this time revealing a second scream and something that sounded like a metallic door slamming shut, the investigation no longer felt like reopening a file. It felt like waking something up. The tape began as little more than noise, a river of static broken by the low hum of the train engine. But the more the audio team at Quantico cleaned the recording, the more ghosts began to speak. Agent Meredith Cole sat in the observation booth as the technician, Eli Warren, replayed the fragment for the 4th time that morning. Between bursts of distortion came the unmistakable sounds of the 4 girls. Laughter, movement, the clink of glass bottles. Then Leah's voice, bright, teasing, "Okay, this is the Silver Canyon Express adventure, day 1, followed by Dana's giggle and a muffled chorus telling her to stop recording. And then, a pause. A metallic thud. The laughter cut short. "Listen again," Cole said. Warren reversed the tape 5 seconds, slowed the playback and filtered the lower frequencies. A faint voice emerged from beneath the noise. It wasn't one of the girls. It was deeper, measured, almost calm. 2 words. Carriage 4. Cole's eyes didn't move from the monitor. "Can you isolate that?" Warren nodded. "There's something else behind it. Low-frequency interference, maybe from another recording device. But it's definitely male. Any estimate on proximity?" He adjusted the spectrogram. less than a meter from the mic. Whoever said it was right beside them. Cole leaned back, the realization heavy. Someone had been in that compartment. Someone the original investigation never found. The lab's next step was spectral deconstruction, visualizing sound frequencies frame by frame. When they did, new shapes appeared beneath the static, rhythmic vibrations consistent with train doors sliding shut. Immediately after, a short scream, likely Hannah's, and a sudden drop in background noise, as if the microphone had been covered by a hand. That was where the recording ended. The FBI's acoustic forensics report, labeled Evidence 604T, concluded that the events occurred inside a moving train carriage, consistent with the Silver Canyon Express model of 1987. It was the first physical confirmation that the girls' final moments took place on board, not after they had disembarked. Cole requested all original mechanical blueprints for Train 604. The blueprints showed that Carriage 4 contained an unused storage compartment, one that was supposed to have been welded shut before the train ever ran. Yet the voice on the tape suggested otherwise. When she contacted the Northwest Rail Authority, their records listed the compartment as non-existent. The maintenance director insisted there had never been a door on that wall. Cole faxed him a copy of the 1986 blueprint. Silence followed. That night, she played the tape again alone in her hotel room. Through the hiss, she could almost sense movement. A breath, a whisper, a faint knock near the end. The sound didn't match the rhythm of the train. It was slower, deliberate, almost like someone tapping from the other side of a wall. The next morning, Cole returned to Blackwood Tunnel with a field recorder and a forensic engineer. They positioned microphones near the collapsed service shaft. Within minutes, they detected faint magnetic interference, similar to that found on the cassette. This area still carries residual electromagnetic fields, the engineer explained, like something electronic was active here for a long time. Cole stared into the tunnel's darkness, or like something still buried in there. That evening, she contacted the Bureau's archive division to request the original evidence logs from 1987. The ones that documented every item recovered from the Silver Canyon Express. Within the hour, she received an automated message, record unavailable. Access restricted under Federal Code 12-8B. Federal Code 12-8B was reserved for classified intelligence operations. Cole's pulse quickened. What could possibly link 4 missing teenagers to a restricted federal file? She pressed play on the tape once more. Static filled the room. Then the voice again, faint but clearer this time, as if the years of silence were beginning to unravel themselves. Carriage 4, it repeated. Then, just before the recording ended, a second voice whispered, higher, trembling, unmistakably young. Please, don't. Cole froze. It wasn't fear that gripped her, it was confirmation. The girls hadn't vanished into thin air. Someone had been with them. And if the Bureau's own archives were locked under classification, that meant whoever it was hadn't been a stranger. By the time Agent Cole traced the voice on the tape to Carriage 4, one pattern had already begun to emerge. In every report from 1987, Carriage 7 appeared repeatedly in the passenger manifests, though no investigator ever explained why. The manifests were partial, handwritten, and smudged with age. But one name stood out, circled in red ink on the original log. Alan Rourke, age 42, government contractor. Destination, St. Louis. Occupation, classified. Rourke had been seated one carriage behind the girls. The file included his statement, brief and vague. Heard laughter, nothing unusual. Slept most of the way. Then a signature that didn't match the one on his driver's license. Cole requested his personnel file. What she received wasn't what she expected. The folder was thin, just 3 sheets. 2 of them were completely redacted. The third contained a note. Transferred to Washington, D.C., 1988. Subsequent whereabouts unknown. She leaned back in her chair, staring at the single unredacted line left visible. Subject temporarily assigned to surveillance operations aboard civilian transport lines. 1987 surveillance operations. Civilian trains. Cole picked up the phone. Eli, cue up the tape again. Slow it down to half speed. Through the static came that same male voice. Carriage 4. But right after the words faded, a faint mechanical click followed, like the closing of a recorder switch. It wasn't a random passenger sound. It was the distinct snap of a reel-to-reel microphone used by law enforcement in the 1980s. Someone was recording them, she said quietly. Eli frowned. You think Rourke was running surveillance on the train? Maybe not surveillance, Cole said. Maybe an operation, one that never made it into the public file. To confirm the hunch, Cole visited the Silver Canyon Rail Depot, now little more than a rusted skeleton. Beneath decades of dust, she found an old maintenance roster. The conductor that night had been Thomas Heller, retired, living in Arizona. 2 days later, she tracked him down. Heller's small desert home smelled of oil and sun-baked wood. The moment she mentioned the Silver Canyon Express, his hands began to shake. 4 girls, he whispered. I still remember them. They were laughing near the vending car. Then, around midnight, I saw that man. Tall gray coat, badge on his chest. Said he was with the department. Told me to keep the next 2 cars empty until Springfield. Cole's pulse tightened. Did he give a name? No, Heller said. But he sat in carriage 7. Always facing forward, never slept. When we stopped near Blackwood Tunnel, he disappeared. Gone before sunrise, did you report it? Heller nodded weakly. To the bureau office in Missouri. 2 men came a week later, told me to forget it. Said it wasn't my business. He looked away, his voice cracking. You think he had something to do with those girls? Cole didn't answer. She didn't have to. Back at Quantico, she dug deeper. Hidden within the Bureau's 1988 intelligence ledger, she found an entry that froze her blood. Operation Greyline, surveillance transfer involving field agent AR, deceased 1988, cause undisclosed. All physical evidence archived under National Transportation File 9B4003. Alan Rourke hadn't vanished. He'd died in 1 year after the girls, and his classified materials had been sealed in a transportation file that no one had ever reopened. Cole stared at the notation, 9B403. Then at the photograph pinned to her, while the grainy shot of the Silver Canyon Express, disappearing into the Blackwood Tunnel. The line between investigation and cover-up had just blurred. That night, she received an email from an unlisted address. No subject line. Just a single attachment and a photo. It showed 4 seats inside a train carriage. On the window glass, written in condensation, were 2 words scrawled by a finger. We're here. The timestamp on the photo was May 2012. The day before the tunnel collapse, Cole exhaled. Her reflection ghosted in the monitor's glow. The investigation wasn't only uncovering the past, it was starting to move again. The photograph had been sent from an encrypted address that vanished an hour later. No trace, no IP trail. Just that chilling image. 4 empty train seats and a message traced in fog. We're here. Agent Cole couldn't sleep. The timestamp, May 2012, meant the photo was taken the same week a minor landslide had sealed off part of the Blackwood Tunnel. For 25 years, the area had remained untouched, declared unstable and off-limits to the public. The next morning, Cole and forensic engineer Ray Navarro drove to the tunnel site. The entrance was a jagged scar of stone and rusted steel. Rain drizzled softly as Cole stared into the darkness. If this was sent from here, she murmured, something's still inside. They followed the debris trail into the service corridor, the one that once led to Carriage 4's maintenance shaft. The air smelled of copper and wet soil. Navarro swept his detector across the rubble. The machine chirped faintly. Metal reading. Compact, not structural, he said. Something buried about 3 feet down. Cole crouched beside him, brushing away wet gravel until her fingers hit something smooth. The corner of a sealed evidence box, stamped federal property. Its identification tag was almost illegible except for one detail, 9B403. Her chest tightened. That's Rourke's file number. They pried it open. Inside were water-damaged documents, a small recorder, and what looked like a silver charm bracelet tangled in a strip of tape. 4 letters were engraved into its side. LDHS Leah, Dana, Hannah, Sarah. Cole's hand trembled as she lifted it. The bracelet was corroded but unmistakable. The same one Leah's mother had described wearing the day she disappeared. Navarro examined the recorder. The label read, Train Audio Surveillance, March 17, 1987. The reel was jammed, but part of the tape was intact. If we can restore this, it could tell us exactly what happened that night, he said. Before they could continue, a voice echoed from the tunnel entrance. "You're trespassing on restricted ground." Two men approached in reflective vests carrying clipboards. They claimed to be from the Department of Transportation, but their credentials looked freshly printed. One of them eyed the evidence box. "That material's federal." "Hand it over." Cole flashed her badge. "I am federal." "Who sent you?" The man didn't answer. Instead, he exchanged a brief look with his partner. "You shouldn't have found that," he muttered. Then they turned and walked back toward the light. By the time Cole reached the surface, they were gone. No vehicle, no footprints in the mud. Back in Quantico, the lab began drying the papers from the box. Under infrared light, faint lines of text reappeared, coordinates-coded transmissions, and an internal memo stamped with a clearance mark Cole had never seen before. Greyline Phase 2. She sat in silence, staring at the memo. Greyline, the same name that had appeared in Rourke's obituary file. The next morning, before she could draft her report, her phone buzzed. It was Eli from the audio lab. His voice was shaky. "Meredith, I restored part of the tape. What's on it?" A long pause, then. "You need to hear this yourself. But it's not just the girls. There's another voice, and one that shouldn't exist. It says your name." Cole froze. The case was no longer about the past, and someone was rewriting it in real time. When Cole returned to the field office, the sound lab lights were still dimmed, a low hum filling the air. Eli stood near the console, pale, eyes fixed on the screen as if afraid to turn away. "It took 12 hours to clean this section," he said quietly. "The distortion isn't from age. Someone tampered with the original recording. Multiple overlays, deliberate masking." Cole crossed her arms. "Play it." The speakers crackled, then the familiar hiss of the Silver Canyon Express engine emerged. For a few seconds, there was only laughter, the girls' voices echoing through the train. Then came a heavier sound. Boots on metal, a door sliding open. A man's voice followed, calm, practiced. "Evening, ladies." "Ticket check." Cole felt her pulse slow. "That's not Rourke," she whispered. Eli nodded. Different cadence, regional accent. "I ran it through the voice database, matched with a 1987 audio interview from the Missouri Transit Authority." He tapped the screen. A name appeared, Thomas Heller. Cole's throat tightened. "The conductor?" "Same one you interviewed 2 weeks ago." She leaned closer to the monitor as the tape played on. The girls sounded uneasy now, shuffling, whispering. One asked, "Are we in trouble?" Then Heller's voice again, lower. "Not if you stay quiet." The recording warped, and for a few seconds there was only the rhythmic clatter of wheels, before something heavy struck the microphone, a thud, a scream, then silence. When the static cleared, Heller's voice returned, faint and trembling. "They said this would be quick." "God forgive me," Cole froze. He confessed on tape. Eli exhaled. "That's not all. Listen to the end." The final seconds carried a faint background tone, Morse-like beeps. When decoded, it formed 3 letters. GL2. Cole's eyes widened. Greyline, Phase 2. Hours later, Cole was on a flight to Arizona. She replayed the conversation she'd had with Heller. His shaking hands, his evasive answers. If he'd been the conductor that night, and if Rourke was conducting a surveillance op, then Heller hadn't been a bystander. He'd been a participant. When she arrived, Heller's house was quiet. The door was ajar, creaking softly in the desert wind. Inside, the air smelled of old oil and dust, but something else too. Copper, faintly metallic. "Heller?" She called out. No answer. In the small living room, stacks of train memorabilia lined the shelves. But behind a framed schedule of the Silver Canyon Express, Cole noticed the corner of a hidden compartment. She pried it open. Inside was a uniform, the one Heller had worn in 1987, neatly folded. Beneath it, a small box labeled March 17th, 87, Do Not Destroy. Cole lifted the lid. Inside were 4 Polaroids, their colors faded with time. Each showed the same corridor of the train. The last image froze her, the girls sitting together smiling nervously. Behind them, a man in a gray coat, Alan Rourke, standing half in shadow. But in the reflection of the window, barely visible, another figure stood behind the camera, Heller himself. A floorboard creaked behind her. Cole turned sharply by, but the room was empty. Only the wind moved through the doorway. She slipped the photos into an evidence bag and noticed a letter tucked at the bottom of the box. The handwriting was shaky. Agent Cole, if you're reading this, I'm sorry. They told me it was a security drill. They never said there were girls on that train. I thought I could keep them safe. But when the door sealed, it was too late. I've lived with their voices for 25 years. The static never stops. At the bottom was a final line, almost illegible. Check the rail yard. The wall beneath carriage 4 isn't solid. Cole's breath caught. She stepped outside just as red and blue lights filled the street. 2 sheriff units had arrived, but before she could speak, one deputy called out, "Ma'am, we found him." Cole's stomach sank. Heller lay slumped in the driver's seat of his old truck, a pistol resting on the dashboard. The note on his lap bore only 2 words, "They're watching." Cole stared into the twilight, her pulse hammering. Whoever they were, they'd silenced the only man who might have told the truth. And now her next destination was clear. The Arizona coroner ruled Thomas Heller's death a suicide. The official report reached Agent Cole's desk 2 days later, neatly typed clinical final. But she had read enough of these files to know what didn't belong. The ballistics angle was wrong. The powder residue didn't match the weapon found in his truck. Someone had staged it. By the time she filed a request to access the local sheriff's impound records, the truck was gone, transferred for disposal under a Department of Transportation code she'd never seen before. The same thing had happened in 1987. Evidence removed, redirected, erased. Cole's only lead left was the line in Heller's final note. The wall beneath carriage 4 isn't solid. She flew back to Missouri, to the long-abandoned Silver Canyon rail yard. At dawn, fog rolled low over the twisted tracks. The place smelled of oil, rain, and rusted history. The skeletal remains of carriage 4 sat under a corrugated roof, half-eaten by time. Cole walked along the side panels, her flashlight cutting across the metal. The paint peeled in long, flaking strips, revealing faint letters beneath. Property of U.S. Transit Security Division. That division hadn't existed since 1989. She ducked inside. Dust swirled in her beam as she traced the walls. Then she noticed it. One section of paneling was newer, smoother. She pressed her hand against it. Hollow. "Navarro, get me a drill," she said over her radio. Minutes later, the drill bit pierced the wall. A cascade of soot and burnt paper poured out. The remains of files, hundreds of them. She sifted through the fragments with gloved hands, the edges blackened, brittle. One folder still carried a half-readable label. Greyline, Phase 2, Asset Control. Inside were what looked like declassified intelligence summaries, passenger lists annotated with numbers, coded memos about target identification, and a single typed page marked Incident Containment Report, March 17, 1987. Cole read aloud. 4 civilians entered Surveillance Zone C. Subject AR authorized intercept protocol. Containment breach at 00:42 hours. Secondary operative neutralized witnesses. Her throat went dry. "Neutralized," she whispered. "That's what they called it." Navarro leaned closer. "Who was the secondary operative?" Cole turned the page. A single line sat at the bottom, half-burned but legible. Operative ID, Heller T-Bree Rail Liaison. The tape, the photo, the suicide, on all of it made sense now. Heller had been part of something he didn't understand. A low-level participant in a classified operation that ended in tragedy. But the more she pieced together, the clearer one thing became. The 4 girls hadn't simply vanished. They had been collateral damage in a covert mission. Cole gathered the remaining documents, sealing them in evidence bags. But before she could leave, Navarro's voice echoed through the hollow train car. "Meredith, you should see this." He'd pulled free a small steel case hidden deeper in the cavity. Inside were rolls of microfilm, each labeled Surveillance Footage, Blackwood Tunnel. Cole held one reel up to the light. Faded frames flickered against the translucent strip. Flashes of the train interior, blurred faces, and a timestamp reading 00:43 a.m., March 17, 1987, the same time listed in the containment report. As she turned the reel, a final image came into view. 4 silhouettes standing at the end of the carriage, facing the camera, and behind them in the far corner. A reflection, a man's outline wearing a federal issue badge. Before Cole could speak, the sound of footsteps echoed outside. Heavy, deliberate. Navarro switched off the flashlight. Through a crack in the paneling, she saw 2 men in dark coats step into the yard. No insignia. No visible ID. One of them carried a metal canister. The other struck a match. Cole's breath hitched. They weren't there to search. They were there to finish what someone had started decades ago. She whispered, "We're leaving. Now." As they slipped out the back of the yard, flames licked the night sky behind them. The past, the files, the carriage, the truth was burning again. But Cole had the reels. The highway sign for mile 88 loomed out of the fog like a ghost returning to the scene. Cole slowed the Bureau-issued SUV to a crawl. Beyond the road, the Blackwood Tunnel gaped open in the hillside, the same place where, 25 years earlier, the Silver Canyon Express had vanished into darkness and 4 girls were never seen again. It was just after 3 a.m. The fire that consumed Carriage 4 2 nights ago still burned faintly in her mind. Every instinct told her she shouldn't be here. But the microfilm reels she'd salvaged from the wreckage had left her no choice. Each frame revealed something the FBI had missed, or buried. The footage showed a hidden maintenance platform located exactly at mile 88, an unregistered junction beneath the tunnel's main line. It wasn't listed on any transportation record, and according to the coordinates scrawled in Heller's final note, it was where the wall beneath Carriage 4 isn't solid. Cole adjusted her flashlight and stepped into the tunnel's throat. The air was colder here, heavy with damp earth and the metallic tang of iron. Her boots crunched over gravel as she followed the faded service rail deeper inside. At 300 feet, she found it, a sealed door built into the tunnel's sidewall. The metal looked newer than the surrounding structure. She brushed her fingers over the lock. Department of Transportation, restricted access. Navarro's voice crackled over the comms. "I've got the ground radar online. There's a cavity behind that wall, about 20 feet deep. Looks like a chamber," Cole exhaled slowly. "Then that's where the girls ended up." They worked in silence, cutting through the corroded bolts. The door gave way with a metallic groan, the sound echoing like a warning. A rush of cold, stale air spilled out. Inside, the flashlight beam revealed an underground maintenance bay. Walls lined with decayed machinery, cables dangling like vines. And against the far wall stood 4 passenger seats perfectly arranged, just like in the photo she'd received. Cole's heart thudded. On one seat, a small bracelet glimmered under the dust, the same silver charm she had found weeks earlier missing its clasp. She knelt, her breath trembling. "Navarro," she said softly. "Get the camera running." He raised the lens as she stepped toward the rear of the room. There, beneath a thick layer of soot, she saw a metal crate marked Property of U.S. Intelligence Guard Greyline. She pried it open. Inside were 4 sealed envelopes, each labeled with a girl's name. Inside Leah's was a folded sheet. Psychological response log. Subject L. Cole read the first line aloud. Subject exposure successful. Memory suppression test inconclusive. Transfer scheduled and incomplete due to containment breach. She lowered the page slowly. "They weren't abducted," she whispered. "They were test subjects." Navarro's expression darkened. "Tested for what?" Cole didn't answer. She was staring at a rusted observation window at the back of the chamber. One-way glass shattered from the inside. Something had been recorded here. Observed. Then she noticed a scorch mark near the console, the outline of a hand, blackened into the steel. Before she could react, her comm line crackled. A voice, and faint, static-laced, came through. "Agent Cole, step away from the site. It wasn't Navarro." She froze. "Identify yourself," the signal hissed. "You've seen enough. The program ended for a reason." The line went dead. Cole looked back toward Navarro, but he was already staring at the tunnel entrance. 2 beams of light were cutting through the darkness. Vehicles approaching fast. Cole grabbed the envelopes and the microfilm. "We're not losing this," she said. "Not again." They sprinted into the cold night, the roar of engines chasing behind them. The truth buried under mile 88 was no longer silent. It was waking up. The sun had barely risen when Cole and Navarro reached the Bureau's regional field office. The envelopes from mile 88 sat on the table between them, each one brittle with age, each carrying a name that had haunted Cole for weeks. Leah Porter, Dana Hill, Hannah Cross, Sarah Whitman. She opened the first. Inside was a thin memo stamped, "Confidential Greyline Oversight Division." The date, March 10, 1987. 7 days before the girls vanished. Subject selection approved. Parameters: adolescent female, low visibility, cooperative disposition. Subjects to be transported via civilian rail asset under supervision of Field Officer A.R. Cole's breath caught. Selection, she murmured. They weren't random victims. They were chosen. Navarro leaned over, scanning the page. Chosen for what? None of them had criminal or political ties. Cole slid open another envelope. A small photograph fluttered out. 4 girls seated in what looked like a hospital ward. IV drips in their arms, eyes half-lidded. The back of the photo bore a faint stamp. Blackwood Neurobehavioral Unit. She felt the room tilt slightly. This wasn't about transport or surveillance, she said. Greyline was an experiment. The third envelope contained a transcript, an interview between Alan Rourke and an unidentified superior. The voice notes, transcribed in typewriter font, read, Rourke. The exposure phase is unstable. They're hearing things, signals that don't exist. Unknown. Maintain control. Their perception is the data. Rourke. If something happens to them. Unknown. Then it stays buried. That's protocol. Cole's pulse quickened. Exposure phase, she repeated. They were testing some kind of auditory conditioning. Navarro frowned. Like subliminal control? Or worse, she said quietly. Cognitive interference. The voices in the static, they weren't hallucinations. They were transmissions. Cole reached for the final envelope. It was thinner than the rest, just a single sheet, hand-signed. The ink had bled through the paper, but the signature was unmistakable. Deputy Director Raymond Heller. Thomas Heller's father. Cole sat back, stunned. The conductor wasn't acting alone, she whispered. His father ran the division that created Greyline. Navarro's voice was low. So when the operation went wrong, they buried the evidence, including his son's involvement. Cole nodded slowly. And when the girls vanished, they silenced everyone who knew. She opened her laptop and searched the Bureau's digital archives for Greyline oversight. Every request returned the same result. Restricted access, executive clearance required. Only a handful of living officials still held that clearance. One name stood out. Deputy Director Malcolm Reeves, head of internal security. The man who had signed Cole's own transfer papers last year. Navarro noticed her expression. You think Reeves knew? I think Reeves was the cleanup, she said. And if he still holds that clearance, he's protecting what's left of Greyline. Cole gathered the envelopes, sliding them into a secure case. We've been following the wrong trail. The tunnel, the train, the tapes, they were symptoms. The real disease was inside the Bureau. She stood, her tone steady but cold. We're taking this to D.C. As they walked toward the exit, Navarro glanced at the window. You notice something? He said. Outside, 2 unmarked black sedans were parked across the street. Their engines idled, exhaust rising in the morning fog. Cole's grip tightened on the evidence case. They're not watching anymore, she said. They're waiting. The footage leaked at 3:14 a.m., 47 minutes of grainy surveillance film uploaded to a forgotten file-sharing forum. By sunrise, it had spread across every corner of the internet. The video opened with a view of the train's interior, timestamped March 17, 1987. 4 girls sat quietly, their faces pale in the flickering fluorescent light. A man in a conductor's uniform, Alan Rourke, stood beside them, clipboard in hand. Then the feed cut to black, replaced by a distorted Bureau insignia and the words, Greyline Neurobehavioral Phase 2. For decades, the public had only heard rumors. Now they were watching the truth unfold. Within hours, news anchors spoke in stunned tones. Headlines blazed across screens. The Greyline Files exposed. FBI experiment linked to missing girls. Voices in the static were real. In Washington, corridors filled with panic. Former agents were subpoenaed. Retired officials were called out of hiding. Cole and Navarro, still running on little sleep, found themselves surrounded by a storm that no one could contain. When they arrived at headquarters, agents whispered as they passed. Cole's badge felt heavier than ever, as if the Bureau's history itself hung from her neck. Deputy Director Reeves met them in the glass conference room. His tone was clipped. You realize what you've done, he said. You've compromised classified material that predates your service. Cole met his eyes. I exposed murder. Reeves leaned forward. You exposed the Bureau. She slid the envelope across the table, the one bearing Heller's father's signature. "No," she said quietly. "You did that 38 years ago." There was silence. For the first time, Reeves's mask cracked. "You have no idea what Greyline was meant to do," he said. "It was designed to protect the country, to control hostile signals, psychological warfare. The girls weren't victims. They were test subjects in a race we were already losing." Cole's voice didn't waver. "And they never came home." Outside the glass wall, flashes erupted, journalists, agents, protesters. The building trembled with shouts demanding answers. Cole knew it was no longer a secret. The country was watching. By evening, congressional hearings had begun. Families of the vanished sat shoulder to shoulder in the gallery, holding faded photographs. The footage from the train played on a silent loop behind the witnesses' stand. Every face in the room turned when Cole took her oath. She spoke slowly, deliberately. "Greyline wasn't about defense," she said. "It was about control. And it cost 4 innocent lives." As she finished, an aide handed her a note. Just 6 words, handwritten in a trembling scrawl. They found another tape, mile 89. Cole's throat tightened. Navarro looked at her across the room, already understanding what it meant. The investigation wasn't over. That night, as Cole stepped out into the cold DC air, cameras flashed from every direction. She ignored them all, her mind racing through the years of silence, the voices in the static, the faces of the girls who had become symbols of a nation's guilt. The country finally knew the truth, but knowing was not the same as justice. She looked up at the Capitol dome, gleaming in the pale light, and whispered to herself, "They deserve more than exposure. They deserve an ending." Her phone buzzed, a message from an untraceable number. "If you want the real story, come to mile 89. Cole closed her eyes, the sound of distant sirens echoing off the marble buildings. The nation had awakened. Now came the reckoning,